1711, rural Pennsylvania. 11 learned men vanished beneath moonless skies, slipping into limestone catacombs they had carved themselves. They were the sole Invictus alchemical order, scholars who believed they could transmute base metals into gold and marshal the very forces of nature. But when their lanterns flickered out underground, 11 pairs of footprints ceased to exist, swallowed by tunnels older than any living memory. It began the night of the new moon. Elias Van Halen, the order's austere leader, guided his initiates through a hidden hatch in the lodge's cellar, each man carrying a phial of mercury and a vial of powdered bone. Their chants echoed off damp walls Latin invocations to Hermes Trismegistus, promises to transcend mortality. The air grew thick with phosphorescent vapors, pale blue mists that clung to their cloaks and whispered promises of brilliance. Yet brilliance turned to terror when those mists darkened into crimson haze as though the very stones bled. By dawn only 2 emerged, their eyes sunken, their tongues tasting of iron. They stumbled into the village square, trailing filaments of bone dust, and spoke of corridors that stretched beyond the limits of cartographers' maps. They muttered of a forbidden chamber where the philosopher's elixir ran like blood and of silhouettes that moved without shape or mercy. One collapsed before finishing the tale, the other vanished into asylum walls rambling of horror and sin. In the days that followed, townsfolk dared not approach the lodge's iron gates. Mothers barred windows, children slept clutching talismans. Even the county preacher refused to bless the ground. Rumors ignited like wildfire. Some said the alchemists had summoned a demon to grant them dominion over matter. Others claimed they had breached a barrier between life and death, only to unleash something inhuman. All agreed on one fact: the catacombs had become a crucible of damnation. Tonight we descend where those men dared not tread. We will light our own lanterns, press cold steel against ancient runes, and follow the 2 survivors' fractured maps into caverns that defy logic. We will listen for the echo of chanting, feel for the pulse of hidden chambers, and confront the question that no one dared to ask. What did the order discover in the darkness, and how did their quest for the philosopher's stone become a crimson nightmare? Prepare yourselves for a journey into subterranean terror, where the boundary between alchemy and atrocity blurs, and 11 souls were lost to a science that became sin. The catacombs await, and the truth is more horrifying than any legend can contain. Writings of Fear, where history's darkest secrets bleed into the light. I'm Jack, your guide through tales of forgotten atrocities and unspeakable mysteries. Tonight we unravel the 1711 Pennsylvania catastrophe. 11 alchemists cursed in underground catacombs. Subscribe and ring the bell if you dare to witness history's most chilling revelations. In the early decades of the 18th century, Pennsylvania stood at the crossroads of colonial ambition and mystical curiosity. The province, founded by William Penn just 30 years prior, thrived on fertile farmland and burgeoning trade routes. Yet beyond its prosperous settlements lay dense forests, winding rivers and limestone hills that hid secrets older than the crown's dominion. Here in a remote valley carved by the Susquehanna River, rose the town of Harrow Ridge, a settlement of Quaker farmers, German traders and European émigrés, seeking refuge and opportunity in the New World. Harrow Ridge's reputation was one of piety and pragmatism. Quaker meeting houses dotted the landscape, their simple spires pointing heavenward, while blacksmiths and coopers plied practical trades for colonial markets. Yet in 1710, whispers began of an enclave within the town not subject to the meeting's discipline. The Sol Invictus alchemical order, a clandestine brotherhood with roots in ancient Hermetic tradition. Their lodge, hidden behind a veneer of modest timber framing, bore arcane symbols carved into its shutters, glyphs of Saturn, Mercury, and the Ouroboros, the snake devouring its tail. The Sol Invictus order sprang from the ambitions of Elias Van Halen, a Spanish-educated philosopher and mystic, who arrived in Harrow Ridge, and Van Halen claimed descent from Mediterranean alchemists, who had preserved their art through the fall of Rome and the turbulence of medieval Inquisition. He brought with him a trove of manuscripts, tattered Latin scrolls, gilt-edged folios of Persian origin, and vellum codices bound in human hide leather. By candlelight he lectured a small circle of eager disciples, local apothecaries, scholars and merchants with a taste for the esoteric. His vision, to transcend earthly limitations through the philosopher's stone, the mythical catalyst said to refine base metal into gold and grant immortality. Membership remained exclusive, precisely 11 initiates chosen for their devotion, intellect and capacity to keep secrets. They met at midnight, passing beneath a trapdoor concealed in Van Halen's study. The descent was marked by carved limestone steps, each worn by shrouded steps, leading to a low-ceilinged antechamber. There, a circular bench surrounded a basalt table etched with zodiac signs, its surface marred by years of candle-dripped wax. Each member bore a signet ring embossed with the order's mantra, Lux et Aeternitas, light and eternity. Over the winter of 1710-1711, the order labored to carve further catacombs beneath the lodge. They used hand tools, chisels, hammers, and ragged picks to tunnel through limestone, creating a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. Some passages widened into vaulted halls lit by phosphorescent fungi. Others led to claustrophobic niches barely wide enough for a man. Rumors claimed Van Halen orchestrated the work as both ritual and test. Only those pure of purpose could navigate the winding paths without faltering or becoming lost. Harrow Ridge's townsfolk regarded the lodge with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Farmers spoke of eerie lights flickering beneath the earth, like lanterns held by ghostly hands. Children claimed they heard chanting echoing from below when autumn winds howled. Though the Quaker overseers rebuked superstition, they issued bans on lingering near Van Halen's property after dusk. Meanwhile, frontier traders warned of wandering beasts drawn to the subterranean glow, jetsam of fugitives or creatures birthed by unnatural alchemy. Master alchemist Elias Van Halen possessed a personality both magnetic and unsettling. Colleagues in Philadelphia's fledgling academic circles remembered him as a brilliant, restless mind, one who dissected obscure texts on proto-chemistry and astrology. In Harrow Ridge he cultivated an aura of otherworldly authority. Draped in velvet robes dyed with indigo and vermilion, he carried an attaché of black walnut inlaid with copper alchemical symbols. He preached that true knowledge lay beneath the visible realm in the union of science and spirit. His lectures, held by torchlight in the main chamber, blended Euclidean geometry with elemental theory. He expounded on sulfur, mercury, and salt as the tria prima of matter, and taught that the catacombs themselves served as a crucible, the earth's womb, where raw materials could transmute under calculated heat, pressure, and invocation. Yet beyond theory lay his secret ambition, to perfect a philosopher's elixir, an alchemical quintessence that would not only forge gold but heal any affliction, banish aging, and unlock divine insight. Each of the 11 alchemists possessed a unique skill set. Johann Kruger, a German apothecary adept at distilling botanical essences. 2. Isabella Marino, an Italian metallurgist, who joined after fleeing papal inquisitors. 3. Samuel Barlow, a former British naval surgeon skilled in anatomy. 4. Margaret O'Leary, an Irish herbalist versed in Celtic rites. 5. Matthias Leclerc, a French scholar in arcane mathematics. 6. Katarzyna Nowak, a Polish glassblower crafting bespoke alembics. 7. Thomas Weaver, a local mason who carved the catacomb stonework. Ananda Dev, an Indian stowaway with knowledge of Ayurvedic alchemy. 9. Henrique Silveira, a Portuguese geologist mapping mineral veins. 10. Friedrich Müller, a Swiss philosopher studying cosmic forces. 11. Helena Vasiliev, a Russian midwife skilled in ritual incantation. Together they formed a tapestry of expertise, each bound by Van Halen's promise of revelation and by the secrecy oath that forbade disclosure under penalty of death. As winter waned in 1711, the order prepared for its culminating ceremony, the grand rite of transmutation. Van Halen decreed that on the new moon, they would combine their elixirs in a consecrated amphora at the labyrinth's heart. Ingredients awaited in the crypt: mercury purified in sand baths, powdered bone from sacrificial lambs, distilled rose petals and rare salts brought from Philadelphia's port. The amphora rested atop a carved pedestal, a sunburst symbol encircling its base. The initiate's trials commenced silence vows, fasting for 3 days, and nocturnal vigils lit by red glass lanterns. Each disciple affixed their ring to a map of the catacombs, a ritual signifying unity. They recited invocations in Latin and Greek, beseeching Hermes, Apollo and the elusive philosopher's stone itself to manifest. Outside, Harrowridge simmered with unease. Smoke from hearth fires coiled against the darkening sky. Wolves bayed at the moon's feeble glow. In the meeting house, Quaker elders whispered of divine wrath and cautioned congregations to shun ungodly pacts. Stationed at the lodge's perimeter, militia volunteers found glyphs painted in blood-red ochre, warning interlopers to turn back or suffer the order's doom. On the eve of the grand rite, the 11 alchemists signed in solemn ceremony. Candles glowed amber, reflecting in chalices of silver. Van Halen addressed his disciples. Tonight we stand on the brink of the greatest miracle in human history. We shall break nature's bonds, transform the base into the divine and transcend mortality itself. Fear not the kindle of our ambition, embrace it. The disciples raised their glasses in a silent toast, their faces alight with eager anticipation and an undercurrent of dread. With preparations complete, the order assembled at the hatch as midnight approached. Van Halen's lantern illuminated each determined face. The trapdoor closed behind them. The steps into darkness swallowed their final breaths of freer. Above ground an eerie hush fell. No wind, no coyotes, no distant church bells. Time itself seemed suspended, as though Harrowridge held its breath. This is where our story stands, on the threshold of subterranean alchemy and abject horror. We know 11 entered. We know only 2 emerged. But what transpired within those winding catacombs? What dark transmutations occurred when science collided with sin? In the chapters ahead, we will follow the echoes of chanting through limestone corridors, uncover the fractured maps left by the survivors, and piece together the sequence of events that turned an alchemical dream into a crimson night. Prepare to descend deeper into the shadows of Harrowridge, as we navigate the catacombs' twisting passages and illuminate the beginnings of a story that will claim 11 souls and challenge everything you know about the boundary between knowledge and madness. In the bone-chilling pre-dawn of March 1, 1711, the first ripple of terror spread through Harrowridge. At precisely 2:17 a.m., the night watchman Caleb Horton made his routine rounds near the lodge's back gate. He noted the trapdoor leading to the catacombs ajar, its latch broken. Assuming careless workmanship, he secured it and returned to the watchtower, unaware that within the subterranean labyrinth, the order was already enacting its grand rite. By sunrise, no sign of Johann Kruger returned from the depths. Kruger was appointed to oversee the initial infusion of mercury into the philosopher's amphora. A veteran apothecary, he had never missed a dawn appointment. Until that morning, the scholars found his signet ring in the antechamber, resting atop a pool of iridescent liquid that vanished when exposed to air. On his table lay an open codex, its pages stained by a thin film of red. No explanation for its origin. His absence remained unexplained, and attempts to retrace his footfall ended at the first fork in the tunnel, where all light failed. That very night, under a new moon's indigo sky, 4 disciples failed to emerge after their successive transmutation trials. The elixirs they administered, an emerald-hued tincture mixed with bone ash, proved too volatile. Lantern shards littered the gallery leading to Chamber Sigma, accompanied by charred footprints and the acrid smell of sulfur. The lodge's subterranean corridors echoed with fractured chants and muffled screams. Isabella Marino, her final entry in Ariosto's alchemical poems, lay smeared with crimson droplets. Samuel Barlow, his surgical lancet snapped in two, its fragments scattered near a glyph of Saturn. Margaret O'Leary, only her shawl remained, draped across a stalactite in the Bloodfall Passage. Matthias Leclerc, his journal recorded a spike in catacomb temperature up 12 degrees in 2 minutes before trailing off. The Order found their belts and satchels neatly arranged outside Chamber Sigma's threshold. No bodies were recovered. On the morning watch, Van Halen led a retrieval team into the labyrinth. They found 2 bodies in what they designated Chamber Omega, a cavernous hall ringed by crystalline formations. The victims, Katarzyna, Nowak and Thomas Weaver, lay draped against the translucent walls, their skins pallid as alabaster, veins swollen and eyes wide with terror. Intricate runes were carved across their chests, glowing faintly as if etched by living flame. One of the runes matched a symbol for Azoth, the alchemical essence of transformation. The team noted no signs of violence, only the presence of a viscous fluid pooled beneath them. Van Halen's private notes described it as the philosopher's lifeblood, though its true composition remained a feverish mystery. By March 47, Van Halen's meticulous maps of the catacombs, drawn with millimeter precision, revealed inconsistencies. Corridors elongated, chambers collapsed and new fissures emerged. Panicked, the surviving disciples attempted to map their retreat mid-right, scratching notations on parchment. Chamber Delta no longer connects to Gallery Beta. Stairs to atrium gone, replaced by choking sludge. Footprints end at mirrored wall, no exit. During this period, 3 more souls vanished: Helena Vasiliev, Friedrich Müller, and Ananda. Their gear, glass vials, prayer beads, and mathematical compendiums, lined a detour tunnel, each item positioned with ritualistic deliberation, suggesting conscious placement rather than random loss. At 11:45 p.m., 2 figures emerged gasping, Enrique Silveira, and a partner of Isabella Marino's, staggering into the yard with phosphorescent streaks across their skin, speaking in tongues, Latin prayers twisted into eldritch incantations. Chamber Sigma devoured light, and we fed fear to the stone. Azoth cried out as we drank blood's echo. Within hours both collapsed with high fevers and convulsive tremors. Their delirium lasted 3 days, each ranting of doors behind doors and mirrors that breathed. Medical attendants recorded pulses fluctuating between 30 and 180 beats per minute, beyond any rational expectation. On March 10, with only Van Halen and a skeleton crew left, the remaining initiates convened for one last ceremony in the inner sanctum. One account scribbled in oil lamp residue notes the anguished cry of Helena's counterpart as the final vial shattered against stone, releasing a cloud that licked the walls with teeth. Whether in flight or through an arcane portal, the last alchemist slipped into the abyss, leaving the chamber echoing with distant laughter and the final blood-curdling verse of a broken invocation. In the days that followed, Van Halen ordered the catacombs sealed. Stonemasons collapsed entryways and poured quicklime into accessible tunnels. Yet villagers spoke of late-night hammering, spectral lights flickering beneath fresh stone, and faint chanting drifting through sealed fissures. Van Halen published a treatise blaming structural collapse and toxic gases for the deaths, attributing the disappearances to natural accidents and unstable strata. Over ensuing decades, Herege's elders wove the events into folklore, children's nursery rhymes mocking the lost alchemists. 11 souls in tunnels deep, Seek the gold, but angels weep. Stone to spirit, flesh to bone. Beware the trials not known. Gravestones bear 11 blank markers, erected by Van Halen in contrition or as silent sentinels against the truth. Pilgrimages to the lodge ruins yielded reports of crushed alchemical tomes, petrified bone fragments, and Van Halen's original map coated in pinkish grime. The Sol Invictus Order's timeline from the first lost apothecary to the final sacrificed initiate remains etched into American esoterica. Scholars like Dr. Miranda Faust suggest Van Halen's quest approached an alchemical cusp between matter and quintessence, yet the cost, 11 lives consumed by ambition, remains a horror unforgotten. Tonight our descent continues as we analyze the abhorrent experiments that fueled this nightmare. We will trace the compounds used, examine the philosopher's elixir's transformation into a crimson torrent, and explore how science, unchecked by morality, became beneath the austere halls of the Sol Invictus Order. The catacombs concealed a contraption of horrors, the alchemical crucible. Constructed from basalt and inlaid with lead-lined channels, the crucible stood at the heart of Chamber Alpha, a vault illuminated by the ghostly glow of bioluminescent fungi. It was here that Elias Van Halen and his disciples conducted experiments that blurred the boundaries between science and sacrilege. Van Halen's personal notes describe the crucible as a terrestrial vessel for celestial transmutation, designed to replicate cosmic forces in microcosm. Its base was a heptagonal prism, 7 sides for the 7 classical metals: gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, mercury, lead. Each face bore a carved sigil corresponding to an astro-metallurgical influence: the Sol gold, Luna silver, Jupiter tin, Mars iron, Venus copper, Mercury, and Saturn lead. Channels channeled molten metal through spiral conduits, mixing with distilled elixirs introduced at precisely timed intervals. The crucible's central chamber held the philosopher's amphora, a spherical glass vessel with a narrow neck, bound in silver filigree. To the untrained eye, it resembled an ornate decanter. To the alchemists, it was the vessel of transformation, its contents destined to become the philosopher's elixir. A system of copper pipes connected the amphora to peripheral alembics, allowing vapors to condense back into liquid, each distillate collected for successive trials. Van Halen's experiments followed a strict 3-phase protocol, intended to mirror elemental progression: calcination, dissolution and conjunction, and separation and coagulation. Van Halen's private journal, smuggled out by Clara Mitchell's allies in 1712, reveals that the order conducted 12 successful trials on metallic samples, turning iron filings into faintly golden dust before the 13th trial, Compound 13, targeted a living subject. When administered to the 12th living subject, Friedrich Müller, the compound triggered immediate physiological collapse. Bubbles formed beneath the subject's skin, a crimson foam seeped from orifices, and the patient convulsed before entering a comatose state. Initial tests on animal subjects showed promise. Rats and goats exhibited minor gold-hued deposits on fur, but under peer pressure and ritual compulsion, Samuel Barlow offered himself first, stepping into the amphora's chill embrace. Immediately Barlow's pulse soared, veins darkened beneath translucent skin, and he experienced auditory hallucinations, whispers promising alchemical power and cosmic unity, before his body collapsed into golden dust. Subsequent experiments on Margaret O'Leary and Matthias Leclerc followed similar patterns: radical vascular dilation, spontaneous calcification of organs, and their blood crystallizing into lattice-like structure. Beyond the crucible, the order employed specialized instruments: bone chisels etched with runic inscriptions, glass syringes calibrated to milliliter precision, and leather-bound lancets, sharpened to remove precise tissue samples, each bearing Van Halen's spiral and triangle emblem. These instruments, hidden in a subterranean armory beneath Chamber Gamma, facilitated horrific procedure. The Order's experiments were inseparable from ritual incantations in Sanskrit, Greek and Latin, aromatic steam baths of frankincense and myrrh, and severe censure for any ritual misstep. When the 13th trial ended with the final volunteer's disappearance and survivor's madness, Van Halen compiled Liberature Philosophiae, the Black Book of Philosophy, detailing each grotesque outcome. The Order's library was purged, remaining manuscripts burned, and fragments of Compound 13 cast into the Susquehanna River. The Sol Invictus Order's experiments stand as a grim warning. When the pursuit of knowledge eclipses morality, science becomes the crucible, once a symbol of enlightenment, transformed into an engine of death. Van Halen's ambition, fueled by intellect and arrogance, shattered the boundary between healer and destroyer. In the aftermath of the Grand Rite's collapse, numerical truths became the town's only anchor. Amid swirling rumors, graves bore no names, records hid behind obfuscated ledgers. Yet buried within Clara Mitchell's stolen caches lay the data needed to transform suspicion into conviction. By quantifying the horror, Harridge's citizens moved from dread to decisive action, cataloging the casualties. A makeshift register, compiled by the town scribe and cross-referenced with Van Halen's pay ledgers, revealed 11 missing initiates, 2 survivors and 1 confirmed death from the experiment. The breakdown: total participants 11, disappeared, never returned 8, bodies recovered 2, survivors insane, institutionalized. This tally exposed the Sol Invictus Order's secrecy. A ritual intended for 11 proved fatal for 9. With only 2 test subjects, Katarzyna Walk and Thomas Weaver, ever physically returned to the surface, and even they bore scars. Mortality curve. Visualizing death. Clara sketched a mortality curve, plotting trial number versus survival time. Trials 1-4, metals-only testids, 100% survive, minor physiological discoloration. Trials 5-8, animal subjects, 75% survival, noted side effects, nervous tremors in 50%. Trials 9-12, non-human but organic compounds, 40% survival, severe convulsions in 80%. Trial 13, human subjects. The curve's precipitous drop after Trial 12 underscored Compound 13's lethal escalation. Townsfolk, shown this graph inked on butcher paper in the meeting house, confronted the unvarnished scale of sacrifice. Economic and social fallout behind the numerical deaths lurked broader consequences. Livelihoods halted. The lodge's workforce, stonemasons, herbalists, glassblowers, dropped by 60% within a month, as families feared association. Trade embargo. Neighboring towns imposed an informal quarantine, halting trade in lumber and metal goods, fearing alchemical contamination. Land devaluation. Property values around the lodge depreciated by 45%. According to county tax records, local merchants reported a 30% decline in tavern receipts, and the general store's inventory swelled with unsold provisions. Well silted as fewer caretakers tended the area, leading to a cholera outbreak in summer. 7-4. Health metrics. Quantifying the unseen wounds. Recorded medical logs from the refugee asylum documented recurring symptoms among survivors and townsfolk exposed to catacomb fumes. Respiratory ailments. 20% spike in chronic bronchitis cases. Neurological symptoms. 15% of residents reported tremors or tremulous speech. Dermal discoloration. 10% developed skin blotches and phosphorescent patches. These statistics illustrated the invisible reach of alchemical fallout. Even without direct involvement, proximity to the lodge's tunnels correlated with chronic conditions, suggesting airborne transmission of hazardous compounds. 5. Survey of trust. Measuring community sentiment. Clara organized a clandestine survey, distributing 200 tokens in wooden bowls at the market, each bearing a smiley face for trust, neutral face for uncertainty, and frowny face for distrust. The results: trust in medical practitioners 25% positive, trust in local authorities 15% positive, distrust across both institutions 60%. At the town council's next meeting, nearly all tokens lay in the distrust bowl, forcing officials to acknowledge the depth of public disillusionment. 6. Legal framework. Grounds for prosecution. Clara's memorandum to the colony's Attorney General Governor Robert Hunt cited multiple violations: unlawful experiments, violation of common law prohibitions against bodily harm, fraud, misrepresentation of risk to participants and investors, involuntary servitude, oaths that bound subjects under penalty of death. Legal scholars argued these formed a basis for criminal charges against Van Halen and any surviving collaborators. While colonial courts lacked explicit statutes on human experimentation, they possessed broad powers to prosecute conspiracy and manslaughter. Comparative analysis. Colonial versus modern ethics. Clara's findings sparked debate among visiting scholars. They compared Herridge's ordeal to medieval alchemical trials, rarely documented, but hints exist in European archives of alchemists experimenting on unwilling serfs. 19th century medical trials. Early anesthesia tests in London, where surgical subjects endured pain without consent. 20th century Nuremberg Code formally establishes informed consent, centuries after Herridge's tragedy. This juxtaposition underscored that Herridge's dark chapter predated legal protections by over 2 centuries. The catalyst for reform. Armed with data and testimonies, a coalition of survivors, clergy and scholars petitioned Governor Hunter in Philadelphia. Their demands: official inquiry, to unseal and inspect the catacombs, restitution, compensation for affected families, legislation, laws prohibiting human alchemical experimentation. By winter 1711, the governor's proclamation mandated the arrest of surviving order members. Van Halen's property was confiscated and the catacombs reopened under royal decree. Their collapse in the following spring ensured the tunnels remained sealed, but not before inspectors hauled out crates of confiscated manuscripts and crucible fragments. Long-term impact metrics. A decade later, archival reviews indicated 0 documented trials of similar secret experiments in Pennsylvania. Enactment of the Human Dignity Act, 1713 by the Colonial Assembly. Establishment of the province's first Board of Health, charged with overseeing public safety in laboratories. These institutional changes, rooted in Herridge's tragedy, mirrored preventive measures later codified globally, humanizing the numbers beyond statistics. Clara's epilogue recounted personal stories. Margaret O'Leary's orphaned niece, who later became a Quaker minister advocating medical ethics. Thomas Weaver's gravestone inscribed with a single word: remember. An annual vigil held at the lodge ruins. Candles flickering in memory of the lost 11. Numbers calibrate outrage. Stories fuel empathy. Herridge's data-driven revelations launched legal reform, but its human toll imbued those reforms with moral weight. Next, we will explore the broader implications, lessons for unchecked authority, the sanctity of consent, and why history's darkest experiments must never repeat. The catastrophe that befell Herridge and its 11 alchemists transcends a singular horror. It reverberates across time as a cautionary tale of ambition unbound, secrecy unchecked, and the fragile contract between science and society. In previous part, we parsed numerical truths to galvanize legal and communal reform. Now we expand our lens to extract universal lessons from the limestone-etched slaughter. The corrosive allure of unchecked authority. Elias Van Halen's towering intellect and charismatic leadership concealed a darker appetite. The urge to wield knowledge as dominion. His singular authority within the Sol Invictus order erased dissent, masked risk, and equated sacrifice with inevitable progress. History is littered with similar figures, visionary scientists who eclipsed ethical constraints under the banner of advancement. Harroge's tragedy underscores the necessity of distributed oversight. No individual, however learned, should wield unilateral power over human life. In modern contexts, regulatory bodies, institutional review boards, IRBs, and ethical committees serve as bulwarks against such authority, yet their efficacy depends on independence, transparency, and the courage to challenge revered experts. Van Halen's cult of personality thrived because dissenting voices were silenced, ostracized, or converted. Our lesson: institutional checks must be structurally embedded, not granted as discretionary courtesies. Secrecy is a catalyst for atrocity. The Catacombs' sealed corridors epitomized forbidden knowledge, shrouded from daylight, immune to scrutiny. Secrecy fostered paranoia and permitted the order's moral decay. In Harrow Ridge, hidden chambers birthed atrocities unknown to the surface world until bodies emerged clutching runic scars. Secrecy's toll is universal, whether in clandestine government projects, corporate cover-ups, or underground scientific experiments. Concealment fuels misconduct. Open science initiatives, mandatory reporting, and whistleblower protections counteract this dynamic. By illuminating processes and data, transparency reduces the likelihood of hidden abuses. Harrow Ridge's sealed tunnels warn that when shadows persist, human rights erode. The credo "sunlight is the best disinfectant" remains as vital now as it did amid the sanctity of informed consent. At the heart of the Sol Invictus order's hubris lay a fundamental violation. Subjects, human or animal, were consigned to trials without genuine consent, contracts signed under duress, consent scrolls drafted but never honored. These transgressions exemplify moral bankruptcy. Informed consent stands as a cornerstone of ethical practice, enshrined in the Nuremberg Code and reiterated in modern bioethics. The order's invocation of ancient oaths to override personal autonomy reveals a timeless tension between collective knowledge gains and individual rights. Today, consent protocols, patient advocacy, and clear communication form the foundation of any responsible enterprise. Harrow Ridge teaches that without clear, voluntary, and informed agreement, any purported progress becomes complicit in atrocity. Collective responsibility and the bystander dilemma. Villagers watched lanterns ascend beneath the lodge, heard chanting on midnight winds, and token protests dissolved in fear of reprisal. This collective inaction amplified the horror. Bystanders, clergy, militia, and neighbors deferred to Van Halen's perceived expertise, delaying intervention until 9 deaths were buried in collapse, and 8 souls lost to labyrinth and oblivion. The psychology of the bystander remains pertinent. In workplaces, communities, and online spaces, individuals may witness wrongdoing yet hesitate to act, assuming someone else will intervene. Harrow Ridge's inertia underscores the power of one voice to mobilize change. Clara Mitchell's whistleblowing catalyzed legal recourse. Our imperative: cultivate a culture where reporting concerns is encouraged, protected, and rewarded, lest silence become complicity. Science without ethics is sin. Elias Van Halen proclaimed himself both scientist and priest of transformation, yet by divorcing his experiments from moral reflection, he transmuted science into sin. The philosopher's stone became philosopher's damnation. Scientific innovation demands ethical moorings. Advances in genetics, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience promise unparalleled benefits, but carry risks of exploitation, harm, and unintended consequence. Heritage's crucible of molten sin reminds us that each experimental vessel must be tempered by compassion, foresight, and humility, memorializing victims to prevent repetition. Heritage erected 11 blank headstones, silent monuments to unnamed victims. Over centuries, pilgrimages dwindled, chapels decayed, and the memory dimmed, yet collective remembrance serves as both tribute and warning. Holocaust memorials, truth and reconciliation commissions, and genocide studies confront past evils to deter future atrocity. Communities reclaim agency by commemorating victims, integrating such histories into education, public art, and discourse. Silver lantern vigils, periodic reenactments of Heritage's petition, and archival exhibitions ensure the catastrophe's lessons endure beyond stone and dust. The imperfect path of reform, the 1713 Human Dignity Act, and the Colonial Board of Health emerged directly from Heritage's bloodied crucible. Yet no law, however noble, emerges perfect. Early statutes lacked enforcement. Oversight boards wrestled with limited authority. Institutional inertia, resource constraints, and political pressures hindered swift implementation. Today's regulatory frameworks evolved from such imperfect beginning. Lessons in adaptive governance reveal that laws must iterate, responding to new challenges, incorporating stakeholder feedback, and balancing innovation with rights protection. Heritage's reforms set a precedent. Our task is to strengthen and refine those precedents continually. The role of storytelling in ethical vigilance data drove the initial outcry, but stories sustained moral clarity. Journal excerpts, survivor testimonies, and Clara's clandestine letters humanized statistics. Narratives forged empathy, spurred advocacy, and shaped public will. In an era of information overload, compelling storytelling remains a potent tool for ethical vigilance. Podcasts, documentaries, and immersive media that foreground personal experiences cultivate a collective conscience. Heritage's tale, retold through candlelit readings, scholarly articles, and digital archives, demonstrates that facts without context often fail to resonate. Engaging narratives animate moral imperative, transcending fear to foster hope. While Heritage's catacombs embody dread, its aftermath offers hope. Institutional reforms, community solidarity, and the emergence of protectionist laws from tragedy can spring resilience. The Order's ashes seeded a commitment to human dignity in Pennsylvania's legal ethos, a legacy that rippled through colonial America into modern civil rights movements. Our final takeaway: confronting harrowing histories need not paralyze. Instead, it can fuel progress, channel grief into reform, fear into vigilance, and memory into morality. Armed with these lessons, we stand prepared to distill the final reflections and chart our path forward. Next, we will synthesize this inquiry into a clarion call, urging you, the viewer, to become guardians of ethics and memory in your own communities. The crypt's darkness may linger, but together we kindle the limestone corridors of Heritage's catacombs lie silent once more, but the echoes of 11 lost alchemists reverberate across time. We have traversed their story, a promise of enlightenment turned to crimson catastrophe, an intricate crucible of ambition and atrocity, and a community's courageous quest for justice. Now the final reckoning demands we transform reflection into resolve. Herridge's tragedy illuminated a brutal truth. Knowledge stripped of conscience becomes a vessel of destruction. Elias Van Halen's crucible fused earth and spirit, but his hubris shattered its promise, consuming the very disciples he guided. Yet, from ruins sprang reform, the Human Dignity Act, colonial health boards, and a tradition of vigilance against clandestine science. Our modern world, teeming with scientific frontiers, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, neuroenhancement, echoes the same duality. Potential for wonder and the risk of misuse coexist. Herridge's legacy beckons, forge ahead, but anchor innovation in ethics, oversight, and accountability. As we close this chapter, remember that silence and deference to authority can allow injustice to fester. Whether in laboratories, corporate boardrooms, or governmental halls, your voice matters. Here's how you can act. Stay informed. Scrutinize research practices. Demand transparency in clinical trials and institutional projects. Advocate for oversight. Support organizations and policies that empower independent ethics committees and whistleblower protections. Elevate stories. Share accounts of ethical triumphs and transgressions. Humanize data through personal narrative. Engage communities. Host discussions. Facilitate workshops on bioethics, and mentor others in ethical literacy. In Herridge's graveyard, 11 lanterns stand as silent sentinels, one for each alchemist lost to a crucible sin. Light a candle for those erased by unchecked ambition. Illuminate memory with action. Let each flame guide us toward a future where progress serves humanity, not consumes it. I'm Jack, and this has been Writings of Fear. If this journey through Pennsylvania's subterranean nightmare resonated, share this episode, subscribe, and ring the bell. Together we can shine light into history's darkest chambers, ensuring that knowledge grows without sacrificing our moral compass. Science is the crucible of progress. Ethics, its guiding albedo. Without one, the other falter. Thank you for joining me in confronting the sins of alchemy and championing the promise of conscience. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit, and never let fear eclipse your vigil.